So I've finished doing all of the refining and fitting that I need to do around this body, and I'm nearly ready to put my binding on. But now I want to talk just a little bit about actual gluing technique. First and foremost, you'll notice that this area is much darker than the rest of the walnut. That's because with this binding scheme, I'm going to put this on with super glue, cyanoacrylate. And what I've done is just gone around here with a rag and I have wiped a little bit of lacquer on this whole area. Uh, this is just conventional lacquer, instrument lacquer. I happen to use Mohawk brand, but it doesn't matter. And I cut it about 50%. And I've realized that when you cut it that far, for small areas like this, small jobs like this, you can actually pad this down with a cloth and get the results you need, because you're not after finesse. You just want to get that sealed up. And I have a cedar top. I don't know that cyanoacrylate will affect the color of that, but I'm not going to take the gamble. I'm just going to seal that area up before I put any super glue on that. So that's the reason for the discoloration, and I think it's a good technique to use. Now, even if you're going to use aliphatic resin glue, tight bond, to glue your binding and your purfling in, which I did do with this body. This is still in the rough. It has not been scraped back, but you can see around the perimeter of the top that same lacquer. Even though I used wood glue, I was careful not to get it down into the binding channel. That is, I was careful not to get the lacquer into the binding channel, because then it won't adhere properly. But I do that because when I put the binding tape on, with that little bit of lacquer sealer on there, that tape will hold with much greater tenacity while this thing is curing. And even better yet, when it's time to remove it, it's easier to remove. Even though it has more tenacity, it's still easier to remove because you don't tend to tear up the wood fibers of your cedar or spruce or whatever conifer your top might happen to be. So it's just a technique that you can apply in your work. So now my next step is going to be to fit the binding for length and begin to install it. And that will appear in our next segment. All right, I have fitted my binding and purfling around one side of the instrument, and now I'm going to do the other side. As I was doing this, I did it off camera, and I thought, a lot of times videos of this nature that I've seen, it's the little things that you need to know or wish they'd tell you that they seem to skip over. So I hope that by showing you some of what's going on here, it might shed some light on an otherwise dark space. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is fit my piece of binding. And up here, it's not so important, but down here at the lower bout, it is. So I'm going to focus my binding. I hope you can hear me well enough over the noise of the fans. It's very warm here today, and I've got several fans going. So, sorry about that. I'm focusing in the waist to make sure that that bend complies, and I'm following all the way to the lower bout of the guitar, out here. And I'm going to mark that. This wants to be precise, but it doesn't need to be machinist precise. You've got just a little bit of wiggle room, but what you're after is to make sure that you don't drag the material to pull the waist out of focus, so to speak, out of correct position, one way or the other. It's going to make the whole job much tougher. So I'd say you want to get this, once you get that around there, and see, I did this again, and my first mark is off a little bit. So I'm going to make sure that I do this correctly. And as I follow around here with my fingers, my left hand, as you can see, is focused on that waist. I'm holding that binding absolutely still so that it doesn't move with me when I push it around. And I'm pushing it into the channel as I'm doing this. So my first mark was off by, I'm going to say, a 32nd of an inch. So I'm just going to redo this and cut it. And I don't know if I mentioned this before. I don't think I did. But when you cut your bindings to length, I do it in my little miter box thing over here, which you've seen in a video before. Um, when I cut the binding that goes on the right side of the guitar, I put the binding on the right side of the miter box, and when I cut the binding for the left, I put that binding on the left side. The reason I do that is because the saw is oriented as it is. I can't change that. If I do, as I just described to you, right on right, left on left, even if the direction of the saw is tilted out of phase a little bit, the joint will still fit. So here I go. I'm just going to cut this quickly. This segment of the video, by the way, is unrehearsed, and I know you can't really see what's going on in here. You'll have to trust me. So I cut that and try and get you refocused here. And now I'm going to put that in position, and I'm going to check that for a proper fit. I've got what I want. So now I'm going to follow that back around into my waist again and follow it over here to the upper bout. Now here is where the body neck joint is. So this is not by any means nearly as critical. It doesn't need to be as precise. And if you're concerned, cut it off just over length, and you can refine it back into the joint after you've got the binding work done. And of course, it doesn't matter which side of the miter box I'm on, because it's not at all critical. So I'm just going to put it in here and cut it off. And now my piece of binding is ready to go. Now here's where things are going to get a little bit sticky. And I hope that I can do this without shifting around the camera and stuff too much, because this is a fussy job to get all of these pieces lined up. And I have cut my purfling strips. I put these purfling strips together, and I took them over to my little miter box, and I squared up the ends of each piece. That way, at least I've got something square to work with. And what I'm going to do now is set those aside, and I'm going to take my binding piece. I'm going to put the joint together. Now this might be a little unconventional. Other people might be showing you something a lot different than this. I don't know. This is just the way I've come up with doing this. And I'm going to lay a piece of tape sideways in there just to hold the binding in position. I just want it to stay where I put it. That's all I needed to do. And I'm going to take another little piece of tape, and I'm going to lift the binding more or less into alignment and just suspend it over here. I'm not fitting anything right now. I just want the binding to stay put in the channel. So now I'm going to take my purfling pieces and my piece of Teflon strip. The white you see in here is a Teflon strip that I'm going to use because I'm going to pull the Teflon strip after this is initially tacked down, and I'm going to inlay these strips. You can see a little better against this block. I'm going to inlay this as a border inside that purfling. So a little bit fussy here, and as I measure this, I know that it's not exactly square, so I've got to get the correct orientation, and that's where the fussy work comes in. I'm going to take my purfling, get it in the right order, and hope you can see all of this. I'm going to slide those into position, and something that I've discovered is that you can take a short piece of Teflon so that you're not working as much confusion. You can take a short piece of that and put it in because it's easier to manage. And then I have one more black purfling that's got to slide in there. You probably can't see this because my hands are right in the way. But trust me, I really am doing this. And all of this has got to come into position. Okay, I stopped filming for a minute because I was having so much difficulty controlling all of this stuff. It was becoming embarrassing on camera. So I stopped and I pulled this together. I guess my best explanation here, or my encouragement, is to manage all of these purfling pieces out here takes some effort and some time, and you might have to just do it 2 or 3 times. And what I've done is, as I've pulled this together, I've taped on each side of the joint where they come together, because I want to get super glue dripped into that to make sure that that stays tight, so that the ends don't try to splay out. That's the big challenge, and getting each layer of purfling to join with the other side is, of course, critical and very important. So you want to do that very carefully, but once you've got it, it'll be a little easier to follow around. Now, I was mentioning, I think, in the previous segment, before I embarrassed myself, that the white purfling here, the Teflon strip, I made a short piece because there's no reason why you can't join another one right up to it. And that made this piece easier to manage. Now the purfling and the binding, you can't do that with, but take the advantage where we can find it, I guess, huh? So now I'm going to take my piece of Teflon, and I'm going to start with this end because I squared it up, and I'm going to slide that in there. And this is fussy work. And boy, these purflings, they like to get confused on you and do all sorts of twisty things. So you still have to be real careful about what you're doing. And I find that outside layer, see how easily that gets out of control? I find that this outside layer of black that I'm putting in here, if you're not careful, will have a tendency to want to drop downward into the lower binding channel. And it's just something that you need to be aware of so that you can avoid it. Now I'm going to put a temporary piece of tape over this. You see, I'm watching everywhere I'm going. Back here, I'm going to pull in, push my binding down, and tape the rim, and then pull in to get that to come in tightly. And I'm going to do another one where the joint is right here, or very close to it. And I've discovered also, if your binding is going on nicely, things are working out smoothly, you're doing just fine. But wherever the binding is trying to pull away, that's where you want your tape. And I don't want to tape every inch of this because I need room to get some super glue to drip down in there. So I'm being a little bit conservative with my tape. So just continuing around, watching for those problem areas. We're going to come to another problem area in just a minute. That's going to be the waist. Now, if you can see this, as I look back here, you see that black purfling is trying to disappear on me. It's dropped too far down. So I got to go back and correct that right away. I need to pull up and make sure that that stuff is where it belongs. I'm even going to have to remove this tape. Sorry, folks, this is all unrehearsed and probably will remain pretty much unedited. So maybe now would be a good time for you to go get yourself a cold drink and come back when I get some of this sorted out, huh? All right. That purfling is up where it belongs now. And I've brought it in a little better. There we go. I'm going to tape that one down. It's going to be temporary because I loosened it once. And I'm going to put a temporary one right here. And now I'm going to come back and draw this in tight where it belongs. And I am unhappy again with where that outer purfling is. So I'm going to stop the camera, go back and correct that, and then we'll come back. Well, that was a hair-raising experience, but I did manage to get it done. Uh, Most of the problem I had was this outer layer of black purfling. This is only 20 thousandths of an inch thick, while the inner layer of black is some 45 thousandths of an inch thick. And this stuff would just fall under that binding so easily. But I believe I've got everything in position the way it belongs now. And I'm taped, as I mentioned before, intermittently. I don't want tape everywhere because I'm going to drip super glue in there. And I'm going to go get some super glue and get set up and just kind of demonstrate to you what I mean by that. Well, I've got my super glue, cyanoacrylate as it were. I have a very, very fine tip on this because I want good control over this. Good control is, of course, important, but if you just pour this stuff out of the nozzle that comes with the bottle, I think you waste a lot of it, and I'm sure you know that cyanoacrylate is not at all cheap. Now, I'm just going to go around and tack this between pieces of tape. I'm not going to get really, really fussy about this because I don't want to start gluing the tape down either. So I'm hitting the critical areas between the tape. The waist is, of course, a critical area that you want to be concerned with. And also keep a piece of dowel or a stick of some kind handy. If you see an area where you need to pull that binding in a little bit, you can force it in and glue it and give it a chance to cure for a second or two. And that may be of some help. I'm just flooding enough so that this is going to stay put right where I want it. And of course, if you really go crazy with this, you'll run it right out through the bottom of the binding, across the rim, and that's just hell to clean up. I should know. I've done it. Now for the segment that you missed, because I was fooling around with this purfling, my notice about the thin quality of the outer purfling and so on, and yep, that was all excuses, I know. But I think it's an important admission that I don't think there's anybody that does this that doesn't have these kinds of troubles. And I think it's important to point out that we do have these problems to solve, and we're not gods. None of us are, not even the best of us, which I'm not, by the way, the best of us. But we have these problems to solve, and you just have to find ways to do it. And some days, you'd like to walk away from the bench and say, if you'll pardon my expression, piss on this stuff, which I've also done. So, at risk of just going on and on with ridiculous ponderosity, I'll quit there. I'm going to finish this, and when this cures, I will take the tape off, and then we'll finish the process with the inlay work.